will call this meeting to order at, I have 6:08 p.m. Roll call, I know Rosa is virtual, so I can probably do that to help out today to be easier. So I don't know if that's a challenge on our tech sound there, but I know virtually we have Rosa and Tanya are online, correct? Seeing some head nodding, I think we're good. Dwayne.
Present.
Jeff.
Present.
Stephanie. Present. Sam, present. Leslie Wesley, absent. Karima Fowler, absent. And Ryan Mathis, absent. With that, we have quorum, and so we will start our meeting. So first up is consent agenda items. So it's adoption of the agenda and approval of the March meeting minutes. I do want to note one change to the meeting minutes. It lists me as virtual in March, and so I just want to make sure that that gets corrected. Aside from that, I saw no other corrections. With no other corrections or additions, I'll entertain a motion related to the consent agenda.
I'll move for approval.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dwayne. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, so motion passes. Next up is board president report and recognitions. All right, so we're at that time of year. It's one of the kind of fun annual things that we get an opportunity to do is recognizing our zone teachers of the year for each of our buildings. All right, so you're up. All right, so I'll read them name by name. So first up for Coquillard is Patience Trowbridge. Our kindergarten teachers there. Yeah, and then either stay seated or not stay seated, stay standing. We'll do a little group photo in a second here. So, all right, next up from Harrison, we have Courtney Mitchell. From Navarre, Stephen Smith. From Warren, Douglas Clark. And then from Wilson, we have Tiffany Mason. A couple of the folks are missing. We'll grab a photo with y'all in a minute. And recognition from the Southland School Corporation is on Thursday evening, and so at 5:30. So hopefully people can go and support our teachers there. But congratulations, and then we'll get a little group photo over here.
Face this way. The camera. Face us. The camera.
Miss Hackett's got it.
I know, I'm here. Yeah, we're in.
So we love going on the road and visiting schools. Also, thank you to Harrison and staff for helping accommodate and put us together. But it's also what makes these meetings challenging, right? Is the logistics around being in a non-home field space for some of our board meetings. But congratulations again to our zone teachers of the year, and thank you obviously this time of year too to all the teachers that do an amazing job in our classrooms with our students here in the South Bend Department Center. Next up, doing some recognitions for National Library Week. And so from Coquillard, we have Isaiah Abdullah. From Harrison, we have Michelle Bond. From Navarre, we have Katie Ricker. From Warren, we had Jane Klockow. And from Wilson, we had Sandra Scott. So a couple quick, I think, just other announcements to add in. So the West Side Refresh is on May 11th. Oh, it's up on the screen, right? So you guys can read along with me if you'd like. May 11th, 11:30 to 3 p.m. at Washington High School. So excited to see that event happening again here on the West Side. And so thank you for all the staff who are working hard to put that together. Please try to put that on your calendar to attend. And the other one, we have a walkthrough Wednesday tomorrow. So it's a hectic week here for the South Bend Apartment Zone, so that's exciting. Quickly, what's the easy way for them to put a sign up to do that? It's on the,
I think that
Right, the QR code. Oh, yeah.
West Side Refresh.
so the walkthrough Wednesday.
Walkthrough Wednesday. Yeah.
Walkthrough Wednesday. So if you're interested in visiting one of our schools and seeing and learning a little more about it, you can check that out. Your photo might end up on our Facebook page, like Mr. Jeff Ray and some other board members who attended last month. But it's a great way to kind of see some of the work firsthand and close up that's happening here in the South Bend Apartment Zone. Okay, so next up is on the agenda will be business services. Nice.
Okay, good evening. I'm here to present the zone finances for the month of March. So our first slide here is the zone 501c3 discretionary fund. Our statement of activity for the month of March, you will find our revenue and our expenses. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary or to call out. So unless you have any questions, I'll go ahead and move on to the next one. The next statement, here is our statement of financial position. You'll find our current assets, including what's in our bank account and our receivables expected from the district, and our liabilities, which are all short-term liabilities. Next slide, you'll find our budget to actuals for our zone 501c3, what we budgeted at the beginning of the year and where we're at now on these different expenditure lines. So you can see some items were under budget and some over, but we're still within budget overall and close to where we should be at this time of the year. Okay, if I can move on to the next slide. And these slides were reviewed in our finance committee with the board and also in closed session. And so our next slide, we have our all funds update. So this is not our discretionary fund, but the funds held on our behalf at SBCSC, and we monitor those. So you'll find here our updated revenue column from what we expected at the beginning of the year up to March. Our revenue has been updated. You can see on the education line, our education fund is set to decrease due to a loss of student enrollment. Other than that, we are slated to be at around where we projected with a bit of a loss right now. But you can see where we're at in the school year, about 75%, and we spent about 79% of our budget overall. So we're watching this closely and updating as needed. Okay, that concludes the financial update for March.
I move we accept the financial report.
Second, Paul.
There's a first and a second to accept the financial reports. Any other discussion, questions? Okay, so being no other discussion, the question is called. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, that motion passes. Thank you. Next up on the agenda is the personnel report.
Okay, we have here our hires for the month of March. 4 hires, and the next slide you'll see our departures, which happen to be a transfer to SBCSC, although a departure from zone. That is our staffing update, personnel update. That concludes our personnel update.
All right, thank you very much. So then next up will be our focus reports, and the first being data collection for school effectiveness and improvements.
We're trying to make sure that everybody is logged in, and not as a viewer, because we have a couple of virtual presenters with me today. Are we all set? Okay. Elliot and Victor, can you hear me?
I can hear you, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, the same.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and get us started. I'm excited to be able to share a little bit about this section. I'll be up here a few times with you, board. Good evening. And this section about empowering our leaders and really engaging in school improvement through a framework. And as we know, to innovate, really, we are either transforming or we're folding into what we always have done and engaging in what systems are already there. And so as innovators, we wanted to really not only align the data processes that we shared last month in our focus report on data and data processes for continuous improvement, but we wanted to make sure that we are looking at what data and what framework are we anchoring our improvement in. A few questions that we discussed as we were strategically and intentionally trying to design a framework. What are those priorities that we want to look at, and what evidence base is there to ensure that the practices and the areas and strategies that we're focused on are those that will transform outcomes for our students. Organizing schools for improvement. I'll talk a little bit about the UChicago Impacts 5 Essentials, and then our two guests virtually I'll introduce them and they will give us a little bit more information. These 5 essentials are effective leaders, supportive environments, collaborative teachers, ambitious instruction, and involved families as domains or categories of for transformation, where we can really focus on and hone in on what areas need to be tightened up, organized for improvement. When 3 of the 5 areas in the 5 essentials, there was Chicago Public Schools was the place for the research of the 5 essentials, and when 3 or more of those areas are shored up and are organized for improvement, there is a 10 times higher likelihood of transformation for student outcomes. And we made sure that at the center and at the anchor of our school improvement or school effectiveness framework was the 5 essentials. Like I mentioned last board meeting, a data process that allows us to, no matter what the data source is, no matter what data information is coming in, we have a system and a way that we look at the data. We're identifying themes, really capturing the insights, looking for what opportunities there are, making small bets, engaging in strategies, and then really monitoring implementation for improvement. The anchor for that for us has been the 5 essentials, and we're excited to engage in that process. A big part of that process is surveying. As you know, we have been surveying for a few years. And one of the things that we ran into is we did not have a coherent framework for surveying. And we were surveying often without domains or specific areas that we were able to inform improvement with, and not only for us, but for school leadership teams. Here's just a capture of these 5 essentials. You can see ambitious instruction, collaborative teachers, the supportive environment, effective leaders, and involved families in each of our schools for this first survey collection period, which happened in mid-January. to mid-February. Schools are leveled or identified as being well organized for improvement, organized, moderately organized, partially organized, and not yet organized. And through the unpacking of this information, you can see where there's variability in school leadership teams, not only us, but school leadership teams and principals were able to take a closer look at that variability and identify areas for improvement. I'm about to introduce our UChicago Impact partners. As with other partners, we don't engage just in getting information or having somebody come in and do something with our schools, but instead really want to engage and align in a partnership. And we have done that in an integrated and I think comprehensive way, providing professional learning around the 5 essentials so that our school leadership teams, that includes principals, assistant principals, deans of academics, deans of school culture, we're all engaged together in learning about not only the 5 essentials, but the high leverage variables for improvement. There's leadership coaching, and so coaching for principals and assistant principals and others on the team anchored in the 5 essentials so that our framework is really at the center of the coaching. Coordinating the annual survey data, like I mentioned, our first window of data collection was in mid-January through mid-February this year. And facilitating the data analysis and the planning improvement. So aligned to our processes, but looking at school leadership team work of unpacking the data and what actions they might take based on the insights that they have. Our partners at UChicago Impact have been critical to that process and have facilitated most recently last month a session where we were able to start digging into the data with our school leadership teams. I would like to introduce them both to you. Unfortunately, they couldn't be here in person, but I would like to introduce Elliot Ransom, who is Co-Chief Executive Officer, Co-CEO at UChicago Impact, and Dr. Victor Simon, who works closely with UChicago Impact and is our District Superintendent in Illinois. Thank you both, and Elliot, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Roxana, and thanks everyone for welcoming us in this virtual format to join you this evening. Certainly delighted to be here. As Roxana mentioned, my name is Elliot Ransom. I serve as co-CEO of UChicago Impact. I want to try and provide kind of a brief overview of our organization and what drives our work, and then really kind of dive into just some framing notion about the 5 essentials and what's at the heart of that work, and then the different components of it that Roxana mentioned that we'll unpack a little bit more before I transition to Victor to share from his perspective as well. So if you want to go to the next slide for me. So UChicago Impact is an organization that exists within the University of Chicago. And we're created, and kind of what drives us is a mission to empower educators to use research and data to improve practices that we know promote positive student outcomes. As a result of this, we view educators, so kind of teachers and leaders, as the key levers of change. So we don't, unlike a lot of kind of not-for-profit organizations in the education space, we do not work directly with the students, but instead, we seek to bolster the knowledge, the skills, and the practices of the educators who are on the ground in the schools day in and day out, working with the students, and really help them to improve the conditions and experiences for their students. The next slide, please. We've been doing this work since 2011 when we were formed with a vision to really help translate research to practice, and most notably, research from our colleagues at the UChicago Consortium on School Research at the University of Chicago. We're housed within an academic department of the university, so we work hand in hand with scholars and researchers at the university as we continue to then export work out into the field and support practitioners. We've been fortunate enough over the years to partner with over 6,500 schools and have had well over 10 million students, teachers, and parents engage with our offerings in some capacity, most of which is through the survey of the 5 essentials. And kind of with that, and I certainly appreciate and want to acknowledge and recognize the zone's efforts in this space to ensure that it's not just data distribution, but instead that there are real meaningful supports provided to the practitioners who are the recipients of the data And we've been fortunate enough to support thousands of educators across the country through professional learning opportunities. Again, anchored in this idea of helping practitioners translate research and data into practice improvements in their day-to-day living in the school. The next slide, please. At the center of all of this work that drives our organization, and certainly is true for the 5 Essentials, is this core belief, and I believe it's a shared belief that brought us together with the Zone in a really powerful way, that all students are ultimately entitled to a safe, supportive environment that provides them with these robust opportunities to learn, to grow, and to thrive. But an equally held belief on the next slide is that teachers are entitled to these positive work environments where they too are supported, and they're supported as professionals. They're continuously developed in their craft, and they're empowered from within the classroom and kind of across the school to help lead efforts to both establish and then achieve the school's goals. Because we know that our belief and our vision for our students is only attainable if we activate teachers and teacher leadership in this way and provide them the conditions that they need in order to thrive. And that takes us directly into the core premise of the 5 Essentials system. So if you advance, you can probably advance it to the next slide as well. Thank you. In the most basic sense, the 5 Essentials represents an opportunity for us as adults to listen to our key constituents, our students, our teachers, and our parents, and enable them to lend their voices and to share their experiences with us as a way to provide us with these critical insights and data to help us understand what is going well in our schools and what opportunities we have to refine and improve the organizational conditions that we know will best support the education, the well-being, and ultimately the development of all of our students. And I apologize, I thought I had removed the graphic images here, so sorry about that. Yeah, you're good. You can advance to the next slide, and I am going to do a foul here as well, and have some animations in here, so apologies. But in terms of thinking about, you can do 2 more clicks and you're good. Yeah, there's perfect. In terms of thinking about the kind of totality of the 5 Essentials system itself, there is the research-based framework that defines for us the most influential factors for school improvement. And this is based on over 30 years of research and more than 20 years of direct data analysis, honing in on understanding what it is that matters most in a school's ability to improve outcomes for students. That then enables us, we're kind of enabled to capture that data through the research-based diagnostic survey, administered annually, as I said, to students, teachers, and parents, that enables us to gather insights and information on these essential factors that drive school improvement. We then are able to bring that data back after analyzing it in some really sophisticated statistical methodologies to the schools and reflect back to them their strengths and areas of opportunity along the 5 essential factors to enable them to dive into the data for reflection and analysis. That happens inside of, as the starting point, engaging professional learning opportunities to help them understand and kind of really think about how we effectively utilize 5 essentials data to promote school improvement. With that, I can unpack each of those briefly. So the 5 essentials framework, and here you see, I think, a really important quote from the research itself. What they determined in establishing the 5 essentials framework, so again, ambitious instruction that happens in a supportive environment, led by effective leaders who work alongside a faculty and collaborative teachers who collectively seek to involve families in the educational experience. A critical insight in this work, and it's something that we all know to be true, is that there is not a singular kind of panacea or magic wand that enables us to fundamentally improve schools on a sustainable manner. So there's not one policy, program, curriculum, not one heroic person, right, that is the single ingredient that it takes to improve a school. Instead, it's the way in which schools are organized and the coherence across these multiple facets and domains in support of that day-to-day work of teaching and learning. That is the pathway to promoting effective school improvement and enhancing student outcomes over time. So this framework was established through the research. Again, on the next slide, here we highlight the idea of the survey. You can click one more time, sorry about that. In the survey itself, in terms of who takes it, it's 4th through 12th grade students, teachers and other select staff, and then parents have the opportunity to take it. Obviously, I think you all are familiar with that aspect of it. And then kind of what is on the 5 Essentials survey. So it's 150 plus questions grouped across 22 core measures that give us these deep, rich, research-based insights into the organizational conditions of schools. We use Likert-based scales and closed-ended questions to tap into this. And we have unique content for students, teachers, and parents to ensure that we are keeping the survey as short as possible while maximizing the insights that we were able to get from it. So we only ask questions of the individuals who are best equipped to give us the insights that we need from that information to help us understand the organizational strengths and conditions of the school. From there, we share the information back on the next slide by way of our 5 Essentials reporting site, which is designed to deliver the results back to schools and to help them understand how they are performing in this area so they can dig into actionable data, they can use it to help formulate strategic improvement plans, and they can track their progress over time, which you see here. And if you advance one more, you'll see a second image. The whole premise of the data is not just to do it kind of one time, but instead to see the organizational changes over time so you can see the fruits of your improvement work unfurl before you through the data and can help track that change over time. And then finally, on the last slide, is the professional learning. So we do it in kind of 2 parts and 2 series, if you will. There's the foundation series, which is designed to help practitioners unpack the history, the research, and core driving ideas of the 5 Essentials. We have a good opportunity to engage in those learning sessions over the course of the winter, and actually it's probably almost entirely over the winter. And then as we shifted into the spring and they had data back, we started to dip into our school improvement series, which is really designed to help equip educators to engage with the 5 Essentials result in a cycle of continuous improvement. So we tap into the principles of learning science to help the practitioners get into the data and approach improvement as a true discipline. In addition to that, as Roxana mentioned, and as I'll pass to Victor, we've been wrapping around this work some really strategic leader coaching anchored in the 5 Essentials, but again, helping the leaders and the leadership teams, depending on the school, feel increasingly equipped to navigate the 5 Essentials and the changes that are represented in the data. So with that, I'll pass it over to Victor.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Elliot. I got to say, I have heard the spiel of 5 Essentials as an overview dozens and dozens of times, and every time I hear it, it's like re-inspired by how potent it can be in moving forward school systems. It is something I've been responsible for doing for quite some time. As you were talking, I was thinking through that this is essentially, I'm over 25 years of experience as a practitioner, all different kinds of roles, including principal, chief of schools in large districts, and then now more recently as a superintendent here in the suburbs of Chicago for the last 11 years. Not able to be there tonight. I myself have a board meeting, so this is where the time zone difference, even though we're just on the other side here and not too far away, that time difference plays a role where I'm able to contribute just a bit. This quote is just so meaningful to me in the work that I do, but something that's been repeated a number of times in working with the principals. So as a practitioner, I've been in the schools along with Elliot, but also just with those principals on some Zoom calls with principals and some members of their school leadership team, really trying to distill some of the data. But even before the data was received, to distill and make actionable the learning through this foundational series and school improvement series that Elliot referenced earlier. So some really strong commitment to building the capacity of leadership, which is the one essential that really drives the report. So here, systems being perfectly designed to give us the results that we get. I love being reminded of this one. We talked about improvement science a little bit earlier, and then this makes me think that it gives leaders and those that are decision makers like yourselves, sitting at a table as a board member, the idea here is that we have some say in what changes take place. This is a choice in how we want to approach school improvement. So 5 Essentials gives us this opportunity to be systems takers because it points to these key levers of what brings about school improvement. So That's the mindset and leadership perspective that I like to come at this with. On the next slide, you'll see a quote. This is more recent, and yes, it's something that I was able to share and give some insight on. But what I like about it is it just says that this points to exactly what Elliot said earlier. I was a principal back in the early 2000s when I first started to cut my teeth as an administrator. And prior to Chicago Impact in 2011, really moving forward with this research, some of it was becoming actionable in Chicago Public Schools. It's where I served as a teacher, leader, and a proud graduate of that district. And in as early as 2004, I started to work with some of this data. So I've been a practitioner now for about 2 decades with this framework. And what I love about it is it gives us this cyclical view and practice to be able to every year hold it up and say, here's where our efforts are paying off, and here are some areas that we want to bring our attention to. I'm equally excited as the principals are in zone to know that here in Illinois, I'll get this data back from my own school district in late May, early June, and to turn another cycle of improvement. So the fact that your folks have this data back now and are already thinking about this, chomping at the bit, so to speak, about what to do moving forward, those are the conversations that are happening in the background with principals, like literally this week, last week, and then moving forward. So as they start to close the school year now. So that's the practitioner view. I'll tell you on the next slide here that what you'll see is change is inevitable, growth is optional. Back to this idea of a choice. Things change in education in particular, and if that's something that we know to be true, the growth part is optional. What we like to say, and I like to say as a practitioner that really fully bought into 5 Essentials now for 2 decades, is that it gives us the opportunity to really spin an improvement cycle at the check and act. There is a lot of planning, there's a lot of doing things, but oftentimes we don't stop and check on our work, and we don't think about that plan from that perspective, how it's going, progress monitoring, and so on. And if we do get that far, and that's what 5 Essentials data can get us, if we do get that far, then we can take some corrective action moving forward to nudge a little bit step closer to improvement. So those ideas of plan, do, check, act, the 5E helps turn that cycle. So the fact that this is year 1, and I love that when this was presented, Julie did this earlier, is to say, this was the first year. And I'm really, really excited for the principals being in that first year, because it's literally the first time you get a chance to get this data and improve moving forward. I've turned the cycle as a school leader now multiple times. You might be able to do it multiple times in the school year, but formally, 5 Essentials survey data myself has been collected over 19 times, year in and year out, being either a principal or a school superintendent. So this idea of it being optional, it really starts to edge and help. I love the idea of small bets too, because it helps us edge on what to point at and what to improve on. So in the last couple slides here, I'm just going to show you this. This is live for me. This is our website tonight, and it's been loaded since Friday. So those that are putting together the board packet, I feel that work and was responsible for putting out last week. So our superintendent reports are public, and on the next slide it shows you our website. But on this final slide, hard to see, but it's just a graphic to just say, soon in the next hour or so, what I will present from the board to the board, from my perspective as superintendent, is through the lenses of each of the essentials. So I'll start with ambitious instruction and just go through those bullet points very simply. I keep it to 1 page every month. A lot of hyperlinks, a lot of detail, but the idea is that board of education and the community is responding in ways that are familiar with the 5 Essentials, and we're able to progress monitor throughout the year. So it's something that becomes actionable, and that's the work that we're doing. Right now, behind the scenes in terms of maybe a board perspective, but with the principals really shoulder to shoulder when it comes to them seeing the data for the first time. So that's the practitioner view, and something I was really glad to be able to offer in. Roxanne, hats off into your team and everyone else around Dr. Lewis and so on, to just say, hey, if you guys can join and give us, we'll stretch a bit and go into a Zoom mode or Google Meet mode if we have to. I really appreciate the opportunity to see that perspective tonight. Thank you.
Thank you both. Sure. I know I had mentioned a little bit about the snapshot this gives us from the January, February opportunity, our first data collection. And it offers a visual of each of those buckets, each of those 5 essentials in each of our schools. So we can see the variability, the teams can actually look into and dig into and unpack based on the indicators and the sub-domains within each of those 5 essentials to really hone in on what areas are moving, right? In this particular instance, being our first data collection session or our first annual data point, we don't have the opportunity, and we wish we did, to have last year's data and be able to take a look at that. But looking forward, we'll have that. The identification of what is working needs time for celebration and being able to communicate back to schools, and the school-based leadership teams were able to take a look at that. And then where do we go next? And where do we really focus deeply through our data process to ensure we are not only doing the acting, but actually also monitoring what we plan to do.
So, first, thank you for joining us virtually or eitherwise. So we appreciate having you here and your expertise. So that's great. Obviously, we'd love to see this all green, right? That's the goal. And so thinking about in terms of progress and steps and maybe where we compare, to other cohorts or other school districts or zones, what are some, I think initial first steps for us to take with this data that we could be watching for right away, and what type of progress could we, expect?
Oh, sorry, Victor, are you going to jump in?
Elliot, I was going to say, I'll defer to you up front, but I'm going to want to jump in on it. So go ahead, why don't you start?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I think a couple of thoughts come to mind. One, just the recognition that this is a baseline year. And this baseline year gives us a shot, snapshot of where are we right now, and equips us and empowers us with a level of information that we have not had before. And more critically with that, can shift the way in which we dialogue and work with one another around school improvement, around getting better, and around kind of the work to get better at getting better. And so I think from that vantage point, the most critical thing is to really look at the school compared to itself over time, as opposed to the school compared to kind of other schools or other cohorts of schools. Because ultimately, and this is the example I give every time, so I live in the city of Chicago. My kid's school is like 2 blocks that way. And, in that direction, about 3 blocks, there's another school. In that direction, about 4 blocks, there's another school. And how safe my kids feel at their school has no bearing on how safe the kids that school or that school feel, and vice versa. And so we kind of get trapped in this notion of kind of comparing ourselves on these things to one another. And ultimately, the thing that truly matters is our own data and what our own teachers, our own students, our own parents are saying back to us. How are we using that to empower ourselves to create change, to improve the conditions for them day in and day out? That is the thing that matters most, because they don't go to those other schools, they go to this school. They don't work in the other schools, they work in this school. And so the thing that we need to focus in on is what are our highest leverage points within the data right now, and how can we very narrowly and intentionally focus on one of those key things and fire up an improvement cycle in our own building, in our own practice, to chart a course to work in a fundamentally different manner to create improved conditions. And that's going to take time, because we are looking at big organizational conditions, right? The research suggests, on the front end, kind of the early end, 3 years, but generally kind of 5 to 7 years for a true kind of systemic or sustainable organizational change. And so this is not kind of a one and done type work. And that's why getting this year over year, and you heard Victor kind of talk about that in his experience, 19 plus years deep, and kind of getting it and looking at these improvement cycles over time and really drilling into one's own data and charting a course specific to the context and the conditions of that school. So I'll pause there and let Victor jump in as well.
Yeah, thanks a ton. So more really color commentary on it, but the one quote that I think is so important I've heard before is just comparison is the thief of joy. But I like to add to that, it doesn't have to be. So when we think about this being relative data and a relative data set, amen to that. Like, I really think that needs to be underscored and the principals understand it. The more that they get into this, their school leadership team, and like for me, for instance, you won't hear folks that work here in Gower speak to this from a standpoint of the essential. I'll report that out, certainly at the essential level, but beneath that, remember there are 22 measures. So if you were to click one of these, not that this slide deck will do it, but if you were to take a look and just click on any one of these 5 essentials for any of the schools, imagine that these other measures then that are more detailed, more nuanced, start to open up. And then within those measures, there are questions that are below it and so on and so forth. Those are the kind of levels of detail that then get to have school leadership teams and principals really focus in on a thing that can have high leverage to move forward. And so, yes, it can take 3 to 5 to answer the question, or even 5 to 7. I've been really fortunate to be in this role for the last 11 years, which is, quite a while, speaking to the level of superintendents in DuPage County where I serve. But that said, I've been able to watch that happen over time and to see yellows, which are considered more neutral, turn into greens over time. So that's the experience that I had and why I am involved and inspired to do so with other leaders that are thinking that way and have that growth mindset. But to answer directly, it's this: that school leadership team is going to build up based on the measures below each of the essentials to pick the one thing. If you just envision it, I'll leave it here. If you envision that 22 measures were the equivalent of 22 spinning plates, kind of like that circus act of 22 spinning plates, we really don't want any of them to crash and hit the floor. That's for sure. But some of them get a little bit wobbly, So then the idea is, which is the one measure that this year, right now, we're going to start coming up with? That one's going to have a tight spin on it. That one for sure we can speak to. We can see it. We can walk through a school and know it. And then not only that, but be able to measure for it. So I'm an optimist, and I'm going to say that with really good continuous improvement approaches and really strong planning with progress monitoring in place, which is part of what I bring to the coaching side of this, is that I don't want to overcommit and underdeliver, but the idea is that we'll see movement. And because keep in mind, early on, the idea is that whether it all turns green, I'm not going to predict. But what I can tell you in the 30 years of research can confirm is that it's true that yes, 3 or more that are green give us a 10% or 10 times greater factor than to improve. It's also simultaneously true that a persistent weakness is almost a sure bet that we're not going to have improvement. And if that sounds like common sense, that's okay, because the idea of seeing a red spot on a report, we're digging in and seeing it somewhere else into the measure level, gives us that attention and helps us focus moving forward. So, everything to Elliot's point, I'm saying from a practitioner view, of course, as a board member, of course, as a superintendent or CEO, we want to see improvement as soon as possible. What I will measure my work based on is, can principals and school leadership teams alike be able to speak to the improvement cycle that they have in place? If they can and can articulate the improvement with some measurement behind it, I do expect to see improvement moving forward. That's how the improvement science works.
Other questions? Victor, just a quick question. Understanding all 5, or actually either one of you, I'm sorry. All 5 are really important. In your experience, did you find one of these was more critical than the others to sort of get things rolling in the right direction, or you sort of attack them all 5? Like the other 4 can't happen unless something goes. Give us some advice on that.
Wow, so I saw Elliot kind of give the same smirk that I was giving, because it's a common question. It's a really, really good question. So what I point to is what the research tells us is that the effective leaders as a measure does drive the other 4. So as a practitioner and a superintendent and an evaluator of principals, my own current role here where I'm sitting, I'm looking really closely at what leadership, that lever, is looking like. So leaders that are able to put improvement plans together and move forward on them and build capacity with their school leadership teams, that's an ingredient, and I would argue an accelerant. So what I stop short of is saying, are there ways to hotwire this, so to speak, as Elliot used that phrase? It's not so much like that I'm going to leverage a bet on it. I have my own personal favorites. And I will just tell you that for me, anywhere, and this is because of who I am in my own personal leadership story and how I get to be privileged to sit in the seat that I'm in today. I know that for me, anywhere that I was looking, if I just landed on top of this report from any one of the schools, I would be tempted to double click supportive environment, have it open. And I would dig a little bit further and look for academic personalism. And it speaks to what students are experiencing. I know our intentions may be what they are, but the impact we're having is far more important to me. So impact over intent is a philosophy that I adhere to. And so to me, that's a top favorite. I do not have research to back that up. The research will back up effective leaders being the one that drives other four. I'll let Elliot speak for all that. As a practitioner, I have a key favorite, but it's a biased view because it speaks to how I'm wired as a professionally licensed educator and leader.
Thank you.
I'll leave it there. That's my soapbox moment. Thank you.
Yeah, briefly, we often get the question like which essential is the most essential. And statistically, the 10 times more likely to improve when strong on 3 or more. It does not matter the composition of the 3 out of the 5. So from that vantage point, there isn't necessarily one that is more essential than the others. That being said, and Victor mentioned that the researchers in putting the framework forward talk about leaders as the driver or catalyst of change, and they explicitly note that through their 2 decades of research that led to the original publication, that they saw that it was highly unlikely that a school will improve absent talented leadership. There's also other research. Universities of Minnesota and Toronto put out a pretty big study where they said they were not able to document a single instance of continuous school improvement absent talented leadership. So it's very clear, right, that leadership and that effective leaders essential becomes a gateway because it orchestrates and sets the stage for the school's work in the other 4 essentials. So as a board and as a central office, and if we look to Chicago Public Schools, which oftentimes is not looked to as the beacon for improvement, but actually it is a beacon for improvement at a system level. The big catalyst for the change was the system itself reorienting itself and organizing itself kind of from top down in direct support of school-based leadership and enabling school-based leadership to be the leaders and drivers of change within the schools. So as a board and as kind of an admin team, how can you consistently kind of come to the table in support of school-based leadership and elevate their practices, their supports, such that they're able to be the drivers for change in schools?
I don't know if there are any questions from our online board members. The other one, I probably take the blame for all the data we've collected over the years, right? So I'm a survey nerd. I love that we've collected a lot of data. I'm excited now that our data will be put to great use through a model like this. So I'm excited to see continued progress, and thank you to everybody who's worked hard to put this together. All right, so we will.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Good luck with your board meeting this evening.
Oh, thanks so much. I'll take all the look I can get with those. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Thank you, Elliot. I appreciate you all being here and enjoy the rest of the evening. I just want to point out very quickly, and I know Victor spoke, both of them spoke to the timing, right? So, I mean, ever since I got here, there was this question of, Dr. Lewis, how quickly are you going to turn things around? And it's like, it doesn't happen overnight, guys. After 4 years of being existent as a zone, right, on one hand, none of our schools have any greens yet. But on the other hand, two of our schools are right on the cusp, having 3 areas that are ripe for moving to green, which is very encouraging. And those 2 schools, Coquitlam and Warren, they, as kind of Victor pointed out importantly, if you have something, despite having all greens, 1 area consistently red, that kind of negates having all these greens. But we do have at least, all of our schools are on the cusp in at least 1 area. And then we have 2 that are in 3 areas, and as the research says, 3 out of 5 gets you to kind of where you want to be. So a sobering moment to remember that this doesn't happen overnight, and that after 4 years, this is where we are. And so simultaneously, what's the opportunity given where we are right now in 2 of our schools are on the prime for some sustained change. So thank you again, Victor and Elliot and Roxana for leading this work.
So, from time to time, when we've tried to do surveys in the past, parental engagement has been a challenge for us. How are we doing that space, or are we doing it in particular to make sure we get that engagement as well?
We definitely engaged in various strategies, and specifically being that this is a well-oiled mechanism in terms of Chicago impact and surveys, there are certain thresholds for us to get reports. We heard from all stakeholder voices in the sense of staff, students, and parents. There were different thresholds, but meeting the threshold for parents was something that we were
We
not
did
gonna.
it. It was 20%.
We
had
did
to get 20% of the total enrollment of parents, and 20% of parents at each of our schools completed the survey so that we could get. So we met, and 20% at a different, that's a sizable number, especially considering that parent input, parent engagement has been an area that we struggled with. So, I mean, folks were going to people's homes and said, we need to complete the survey, this data matters that much to us. And I'm forgetting what the threshold was for student input and staff input. But I think at one of our schools, maybe 100% of our staff completed the survey. But each of our schools met that threshold of 20% parent completion, which is pretty significant. If you have a Navarre that has 450 students, 20% of that. Stephen, you teach math? No, that's Ms. Brody, you're a math teacher. What's 20% of that?
20% of our students.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have about 90 of our families that reported.
Yeah, so they met that 20% goal.
And,
Again,
and by definition, I mean, a parent could have several, or family could have several students
yeah.
in this, but this is like on the more rigorous side of defining.
Right.
So it was 20% of student, student population.
So we did get unusual parent participation, which we appreciate. The team did a good job at all 5 schools in engaging parents in this.
Victor has raised his hand. Is it okay, Dr. Simon?
I just, and I'll leave with this, but I distractingly did put my hand up. Let me lower it now. I said that comparison is the thief of joy, but it doesn't have to be. The average statewide in Illinois has been under 20% since the inception of it going statewide for the last 10 years plus. So casual terms, and when it comes to parent participation, y'all crushed it. So we can say comparison is the thief of joy, but it doesn't have to be. That's a celebration, and it shouldn't go unnoticed. Your principals, and I want to highlight principals every chance I get because I've been one and I know that's the toughest job that's out there. So when I think about, and that's no disrespect to anybody else that's serving, but when I think about it, we gave them tips and we pushed, and up front it was like, how is this going to happen? They did it. They traded political capital, social capital, everything they had, relational capital to make sure that it got done. So hats off, put blatantly, y'all crushed it on it. So good for you.
Yeah, absolutely, and the student and teacher, that happened as well. The response rate threshold for there is 50% plus, and there weren't any schools that were even in doubt that they were going to get it. They were all 70% plus of teachers and students responding, in addition to the parent piece. So for our first year implementation, those response rates are stellar. So again, hats off to everyone, because I know that it takes a concerted effort to do that. The team showed up and did it highly successfully.
Thank you very much for joining us. We'll start rolling down our agenda here.
Thanks.
So next up is bridging the gap and enhancing student transition.
All right, good evening. I am back. Aresta Davis, the Executive Director of Student Services. I'm going to be talking about student transitions, specifically the transition to elementary school and to middle school. Thinking about all of the different articles that I have read and what the research says, it talks about how students, when they move from elementary school to middle school, there is a want for independence. There's a want for academic rigor, and then also with the social development. And as I think about my middle school experience, that was at Clay Middle School, which is currently Clay Intermediate. I can think of being 13 and telling my mom, you know, I'm riding the city bus to the mall. I don't need you to take me and drop me off anymore. And I think of academic rigor. I think of Sherry Bolden Simpson, who was my 7th grade math teacher, where I got in there, I had no clue what algebra was and why X was equal to this number or Y was equal to this number, but getting Mr. Devereux, who was my tutor, to where I made it to the Algebra 1 class, my 8th grade year by that time. And then just social development, just going and being, you know, this little fish in a big pond. So transitions are very important for our students as they move from elementary school to middle school. And these transitions play a very crucial role in preparing our students. Things that you will hear in a few slides that some of our students will say, talking about time management, how they are organized, how they think critically, and just understanding why transitions are positive. They have a positive impact on our students when it comes to their academic performance, their confidence, their sense of belonging in the school community. Next slide, please. So on the next slide, this one basically is showcasing the research that talks about how critical transition programs are and how we can use them to smooth the journey from elementary school to middle school. So some of those keywords that you see, there's excitement, but there's also anxiety, challenges, concerns, fear, worry, and so on as listed there. And that last one, one that I think is really, really important is that in this transition, there is sometimes a decline in mental health. And an increase in behavior problems. And so we want to make sure that we have transition programs in place so that our students are not experiencing these things. So now you'll hear from a few of our 6th graders.
Hardest part was like the work, finding friends, new things. No sabía todo que era solo me estaba enseñando y no teníamos tiempos. Que se hace su trabajo y que no es hermano, como no pelean con tus amigos y con sus amigos. I would say do your best, try to make as much friends as possible. It's a reason. It's not.
So building blocks to ensure a strong foundation for middle school success are those transition programs. So again, with these transition programs, keywords, independence, rigor, and growth. We want to prepare our students for these higher grades with the vital skills that they need. And with transition programs, again, it enhances performance, confidence, and belonging. So you've already seen the video of our 6th graders. I'm going to highlight briefly our partnership with the Boys and Girls Club, the Rising Jaguar program for our rising 6th graders, and the 5-Star Bridge program that are all taking place this summer. So last year we expanded the Boys and Girls Club program to all of our elementary schools for after-school support and enrichment opportunities for students. This year we will continue our collaboration with the Boys and Girls Club as they host their summer camp here at Harrison School. Following the success of them being here last year. Mind you, last year was my first year. I don't remember if they were here the year previous, but it went really well. And so we are continuing, as Julia tells me, they were that program for our students. And The Boys and Girls Club itself, just initiatives, leadership skills, character development, and holistic student growth. All of those things are skills that our students will need as they get ready to make that transition. And as you see on the slide, those are our directors. So on the next slide, this kind of shows what's going to happen with our Rising Jaguar Summer Program, which is being put on by Principal Harris over at Navarre. And the Rising Summer Jaguar Program, it's specifically designed to assist incoming sixth graders in making a smooth transition from elementary to middle school. It addresses common challenges such as adjusting to the new bell schedules, navigating elective choices, adapting to that increased academic rigor, and again, fostering that independence. There's a lot of responsibility that is going to come with transitioning from elementary school and middle school. They're, going from little girls and boys to young men and young women. It's the Rising Jaguar program is going to be a blend of, as Mr. Harris told me, learning experiences and fun activities. The goal of this program is to alleviate those transitional struggles. They need to get familiar with not only the building, but the teaching and the support staff. And the Rising Jaguar program is going to run from June 10th through June 28th. And again, it's going to be at Navarre Middle School campus. And so along with the Boys and Girls Club and then to our Rising Jaguar Summer Program, we have our 5-Star Live Summer Bridge Program where myself, Principal Harris, Seth Mouse, and Keenan from 5-Star will be creating this 1-week opportunity for our rising sixth graders to spend out at the 5-Star Life Summit during the week of July 22nd. And again, this is just another opportunity to help prepare them for the transition to middle school. And so as you can see on this slide, they have an innovative learning course outcomes that focuses on soft skills, hard skills, and academic skills. The pictures at the bottom are our current sixth graders who went out on those Fridays that we spoke about at the last board meeting. And so all of our fifth graders right now are actually taking part in their video curriculum. Season 4 is actually a 6 through 12 level curriculum, and it's called Breakthrough in Leadership of the 5-Star Video Curriculum. And so moving to the next slide. This is just an example of some of what they will do. So if you notice, there's a focus, there's objectives, there's the values. There are 5 values for 5-Star Life. I've been out there, I've done the ropes course. The video curriculum coordinator is the most awesome and best experience that any adults, our leadership team, our teachers, and our students can get. But this one specifically focuses on leadership, as it's really small to see. But there's 5, so you have respect, responsibility, courage, integrity, and sacrifice, which again, myself and Mr. Harris will be working with Keenan to make sure that everything aligns with what they're actually doing at Navarre for the Rising Jaguar program. And so all of those initiatives from Boys and Girls Club, the Rising Jaguar program, and the 5-Star Life, seamless transitions is what we want for our students. We want continuous student growth. We're trying to get rid of anxiety and stress and enhancing all of those things that you see there, from confidence all the way to make sure that they are ready for middle school. And so finally, how are we going to sustain our transition program impact? We have to have collaboration and communication, the resources. We have to have input from all of our stakeholders and professional development opportunities for our teachers. Again, the transition from elementary school to middle school is not easy. However, research says that when you kind of hone in, and it's not a district-wide thing, but specifically like we're doing as a building level, that is the best way to do it, because it's not one size fits all. It's what needs to fit the students in the school that they're going in. And so with that concludes my bridge the gap.
Just a couple comments. First, I had a visit 5-Star here in the last couple of weeks and talking to some students up there. It's a phenomenal facility for those who haven't had a chance to. The ropes, of course, was terrifying to me, by the way. But I'm sure it was great. And then obviously, then had a chance to see the Boys and Girls
club does, and stuff. So see great value in this. I as a student, just a couple years ago, went to YMCA. YMCA had done some great programming at Camp Everhard as well for students as well. So I love that there are a lot of these opportunities, and thank you for bringing these. Do you have a good feel for how much participation, right? So this is an optional participation from students, or do all of them have to participate? Like, what, any rough guess, if you will, in terms of?
So we estimated all 115 of our current fifth graders. We want them all to attend. It is free, it is paid for, there will be transportation. So as I'm doing all the other great things that we are doing here in the zone, it will be going out shortly, that permission slip, as well as, I can't think of it right now, but there's a waiver that they have to sign. But we want all of our students, fifth grade students to attend. Yep. And I would mention, you said that we were doing these things. My team has actually, and we didn't add it to the presentation, but the student services team, Ryan and Adrian, there is another flyer that would go out both English and Spanish, and it highlights all of the summer programs. So if they're unable to attend during these weeks, it lists all the available opportunities here in South Bend during the summer for all of our students. And so that will go out.
I think the focus on transition is fantastic. You know, as a parent, I remember when my daughter started high school, I made her do a sport, fall sport, just so that she would start 3 weeks before and have some friends and know a coach and have a connection. And I think that made an impact on her, having a great freshman year. And so I think this is great that we're providing this as an opportunity, and hopefully, we also have, or maybe thinking about like, what are some of the good materials that we have for parents to understand why it's important. That this isn't just more summer school or something else, but that it is a core part of transition for them to help them be successful in that next step.
So I will just add a yes and. All of our schools will still have their orientation programs at the beginning, and so my team is actually looking to add a few more items that may have not been going over. No one's, not blaming anyone, but a few more things for the parents to get involved, as well as the lesson book project that we had talked about. And we also talked about Parent Square, which is another app that correlates with our lesson loop app that we're trying for the Zone app. And so there's a lot of different things that Brian is working on, and grants that he is just finding in order to make sure that our parents and our families stay engaged. And so it will not just be a summer thing, it should go all throughout the year. And so I can remember my last year as a principal, the last time I got up there, and you tell, the parents, your kid is in middle school, they're going to change. They're going to be different this year. You may think you know them, but you really don't. But we're here to help you. And so you just kind of have to guide them through that and talk. And it's about, just inviting them in and teaching them, what we know that they may not know, to help them be even better parents than what they already are.
I do have a question. And this is really going back to 5-star. I'm curious, from the beginning to the end, how did the kids' perspective change of being out there? Did they like it in the beginning? Did they grow to love it? What was the kids' perspective that round, the students' perspective?
I will tell you that I was part of the planning process. Now, did I go out there? But you do have Jen, the AP here, who could probably answer that question. I will tell you, from looking at the pictures that were taken, you could see a progression of the excitement and even how they were collaborating, especially on some of those trust activities that they had to do, and even with the axe throwing on where they were trying to, make sure that they hit the bullseye and did it. And so, but I'm gonna turn that over to Jen.
Yeah, so our 6th grade students, they love the field trip. And obviously there's always one administrator that has to stay back and run the building. So that was me. So I'm gonna give you this anecdote of how much the 6th graders love the trip. When the second day of the trip came up, I had a line of students in which we were calling homes and making sure we got the permission slip signed and the waiver signed, and they had gotten it a little late, so they missed the first trip, but there was a strong core group of students that were like, no, I turned it in. You have to let me go. Like I'm going. I'm not missing it. And so when you have students that are starting to advocate for themselves and starting to really say, I'm responsible for this field trip for them, and I did it, and I'm gonna go this time because I missed it the first time and I heard about how good it was from my peers. That's about the community and that independence and everything else. So, in terms of numbers, I don't have any key data, but in terms of how the students felt, we had a lot higher attendance on those Fridays.
That is the number, higher.
So what we saw at Navarre is that sixth grade attendance on Friday increased by 11.7%. When attendance on Fridays for seventh and eighth grade continued to be on the decline. So that increase in attendance speaks for itself as it relates to the 5-star program. I would also just add, one of the things that we don't talk about why transitions are so important, both from elementary to middle as well as middle to high school. When you think about Navarre, you are having a convergence of fifth graders from 3 or 4 schools coming together. And in their individual elementary schools, they all had different practices, different cultures, different affinity groups, different friend groups, what have you. And now all of a sudden you have these different groups of people converging into one space, and we all suddenly have to get along and like each other. That takes up the first quarter in just setting culture. And so wanting to get out ahead of that, making sure that students during the summer are building relationships, getting to know each other, getting to work with each other, then that eases the process at the start of the school year. And something that I certainly encourage happen from the 8th to 9th grade level, as well as high school is even significantly much more in need of these types of transition programs. So that's why we wanted to do this transition program. We were optimistic that this will go well. And one of my prior schools that I led, we started the year with a sleepaway 4-day weekend thing. And so kids either did whitewater rafting or something, but bringing all of these different groups of kids together, it's not easy the beginning of the school year. It's also not easy for bringing 4 different groups of parents together. At my elementary school, this is how we did orientation, or this is how we did drop off and pick up. And now here, I got to figure out how to do it differently. And then you have 3 other different parent groups from 3 different schools had their own way of doing it too. So we really want to be intentional with this bridge program. So it's academic, but it's also just practical. Right?
And I have to chime in. I think when you talk about the culture part of this as well, the staff also started to really, initially some staff were like, no, I want to stay behind, I want to be at school. And then all of a sudden by the second day, there were a lot of staff that goes, well, maybe I can cycle in, or like, can I go too? And so just speaking to this idea of bringing together the community and having a shared experience for us to build and move forward on, that was definitely something that we saw amongst the 6th grade staff and students. And so there was a uniting effect.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, so moving along on our agenda here, next up is lessons, student voice at the center of instruction.
I have a few people that will be engaging with me. And so if you don't mind, if you want to go ahead and have a seat, see if you have enough chairs, we'll have everybody have a seat. I will introduce in the meantime online. There's something online virtually. We have Nona Ullman, and I will be introducing her as well. So, okay, we'll go ahead and I'll get us started. I'm excited and very enthusiastic about our opportunity to share a little bit with Lesson Loop. Lesson Loop, we're going to really get to see a story of its implementation, but I want to get us started with a little bit of background and framing. I know you saw something that looks like this very recently in a slide previously as we intentionally looked at a framework for continuous improvement, for school effectiveness. You can see the 5 essentials, although it is a bit small on the slide. You can see the 5 essentials are our anchor, our map for the practices and the buckets or the areas that we want to focus on when it comes to improvement. And we've talked a little bit about that in the previous focus report about how those unpack into different subdomains and practices. We also noticed that at a more granular level in the classroom, we wanted to make sure we could unpack key practices that are high leverage and evidence-based in the classroom for teachers. And although we'll be talking in future meetings a little bit more about that, those are the 7 C's, and we identified and really found a way to integrate those with the 5 essentials. I promise this will be an important framing for our story in just a minute. As folks that really focus on innovation for transformation, I am very excited to be able to introduce Nona Ullman. She is the founder and CEO of Lesson Loop, and I'm going to have her talk a little bit about Lesson Loop.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, yes. I don't know if there's background.
Having me virtually, I'm at a pre-scheduled conference in San Diego, and I just wanted to express my gratitude and thankfulness for working with the South Bend Empowerment Zone. It has been an incredibly exciting journey. Your leadership is luminary. They are the first zone to pilot Lesson Loop. We were asked to present at the Carnegie Summit 2 weeks ago in San Diego on the exciting results that we've had in centering student voice and boosting student engagement in service of professional learning for teachers. Just a little bit about myself. I've worked with over 50 educational agencies. I've been a teacher, administrator, and management consultant. I've worked in 22 states, including recently New York City Public Schools, the Texas Education Agency, and Office of the State Superintendent in the District of Columbia. 3 years ago, I started Lesson Loop because the research shows that 86% of our kids are not engaged in their learning, and we know that if kids aren't engaged, they're not coming to school, and they're not learning the content, and they're not doing well on the tests. But research shows that if we can engage them, they'll come to school more often and they will learn more. The research shows that students in more highly engaging class lessons learn an average of 4.5 months more of math per school year. So what we had built, and you'll see this is the poster that we presented at Carnegie, but our theory of change is that if educators have a quick, easy, and actionable way to assess lesson engagement, and this is in real time, and that's coupled with personalized evidence-based coaching tips, that they will be able to create more joyful, rigorous, meaningful, and equitable class lessons. Students will be more motivated to learn, and academic outcomes will increase. And I'm delighted to say that is exactly what we are seeing at South Bend. And I don't want to talk because I want you to hear the incredible results that are happening at Navarre, from the AP down from Jen and from Brooklyn and the students as well from Jade. So I'm gonna, unless there's any questions for me at this time, I would love for you to hear directly from the folks that are actually achieving these incredible results.
Thank you, Nona. This is a story to spotlight Navarre and the implementation, and we have varied roles here at the table because they're all involved and have really, I think, in one way or another, been touched by and engaged in the implementation of Lesson Loop and the outcomes or results of that. So it's really a story that starts with a teacher sitting down with their administrator, engaging in conversation around a teacher evaluation system, a new teacher effectiveness and support system called TESS, where the focus is on the teacher, their self-reflection of areas based on instructional practices and professional responsibilities, where they're looking at areas of focus and where they want to develop, and having a conversation with a kind of coaching partner, their administrator, to be able to lay out a plan for that development to happen. They set goals together. They have the ability to look and be anchored in what that practice is meant to look like over time in terms of a progression. And that story starts at Navarre with Jen Roden, assistant principal, and Brooklyn Bramley. Ms. Bramley, one of our teachers, 8th grade social studies. The story continues, and they will be speaking in just a moment, but the story continues with Ms. Bramley talking to her colleague, Mr. Smith, social studies 8th grade teacher, and talking about what she's finding by using Lesson Loop. He uses Lesson Loop in his classroom, engages the students in this data collection as they will speak of, and the students are able to have their voice at the center of lesson instructional improvement through this process. So I'll let them speak. They can do it better than me for sure. So if you want to get started.
Yes, can everybody hear me okay? Oh, perfect. So one, I'm never gonna say I can speak better than Ms. Zapata because our whole zone board is amazing. Two, this story just starts at Navarre in my office with me sitting down with Ms. Brambley, and we were discussing the things that she felt as strengths and the things she felt as weaknesses. But then we quickly just asked ourselves, like, what could we focus on that would have the greatest impact on the students and their academic achievement? And that led to Ms. Brambley having this question of, well, I want to know how my students are responding and feeling. Like, I feel like I'm doing some of the right things. I feel like I'm doing some of the things I've done at my other school, and now I'm curious, is it working here with these students in this context, in this time, place, and space? And so I was able to just introduce her to this idea of lesson loop. Ms. Zapata had provided us with some logins, and we kind of looked at it and said, let's give it a try. And then Ms. Brambley, being the amazing person that she was, left that and then actionized it. And that's why I'm going to pass the mic to her.
So prior to coming to Navarre, I taught high school seniors, which is a very different animal from 8th graders if you've never made that jump. And I wanted to be able to quantify and measure student engagement besides just test scores. So much of what we do is not reflected in student scores. And when I went to the professional development on lesson loop, that gave me a method to quantify that. So what I started doing was, the first time it was like, let's throw all of this to the wall and see what sticks. But what I started doing is very intentionally using one instructional practice, running a lesson loop to get student feedback. Did this work for you working in pairs as opposed to small groups? Did this work doing around the room or doing a foldable instead of a graphic organizer? Things like that. I very intentionally would pick one method of that, run a lesson loop, monitor and collect the data of the feedback, and then compare that to student test scores. So I would do that 1 week, and then the next week I would do something different and look. Oh, there's my data. So the next week I would look again at changing practices and go, okay, if I switch this and do more small groups as opposed to individual work, how does that change not only test scores but student engagement as well? And I was able to put numbers to this, and instead of focusing on individual trees or individual student feedback, because this is done anonymously, I could look at each class period and really zoom out and see the whole forest of what was going on. From the first lesson loop that I ran to the second one, I saw a 80% increase in student scores just by being able to shift my instructional practices to reflect what they needed. And after I did this successfully a couple of times, I shared with Mr. Smith, I was like, this is what I'm seeing. I've tried this new practice. Do you want to try this too? And so collaboratively, we were able to come together and go, okay, this is the content, but what's the best avenue to give this to our students?
Sorry, before Mr. Smith, I'm not sure that it's clear exactly what lesson loop is. So
okay,
what lesson loop is, that's okay. Lesson Loop is a platform for teachers to get feedback from students. So the students, whether at the end of each class period, it could be weekly, it could be multiple times each week. At the end of the lesson, the students will say, this lesson was terrible, or this lesson worked for me, or I really liked when the teacher allowed us to do small group instruction as opposed to standing at the front of the class and lecturing all day. And the students do that anonymously, so the teachers don't know which particular student is giving them constructive or positive feedback. You're just getting the feedback. We as administrators, we don't look at the data, the teachers get it and they can share it with us, and we can give them coaching strategies. So students might say, this class is not working for me because the teacher lectures for the whole class period. So then we have something specific we can work with the teacher on to move from being, sage on stage and lecturing all 90 minutes to like involving student. So, and I would remind the board that one of our priority areas this year was student voice and student self-efficacy. So now students, so it's one thing, and we've seen it with some teachers where we as leaders are saying, hey, your instruction isn't quite working the way you think it's working. And they're like, you don't know what you're talking about, you just don't like me, you're giving us a hard time. But now the teachers are hearing from the students themselves directly, and we've seen some light bulbs where teachers are saying, oh, so I thought I was doing a good job of teaching this, right? And the students are saying at the end of the class, I didn't understand anything you just did in this class period. So students are now a part of the decision making. They're giving direct feedback to teachers, and we're seeing teachers act on that feedback. So I just wanted to clarify exactly what lesson loop is. Right, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. I'll just kind of add to that just a little bit. The other great thing about this is when you're sitting in a classroom full of 30 of your peers, if you're the one person who didn't like what happened, it's really hard to create a space for that. And by being able to use this platform and have the anonymity to it, students have the freedom to be more open and honest, even if they aren't the most vocal student in class.
Thank you. So I give you, as a social studies teacher, I give you a quick historical overview of my original engagement with Lesson Loop. So we went through the professional development back in September, and like any other professional development, you're either like, okay, I can use that right away, or that's something that I'm probably not going to use. So not that the training wasn't fantastic, but I just looked at it, I was like, that's it. It was just something that I was like, oh, that might just be something that may not be that practical. It wasn't until Mrs. Bramley actually started to use it and started sharing the data with me that I said, okay, well, this is something that I actually can use in class. And for the most part of my career so far as teaching, the only data I've really looked at is we go through a lesson, they take the test, how did they do on the test? That's been the data I've been using. There's a lot of other data that goes into it. We say that as teachers all the time, but the data we only look at usually is test scores. But with Lesson Loop, it breaks it into multiple different categories, from engagement to accessibility to social, emotional, and there's a lot more that goes on, and you can break it down to see where did I as a teacher lose the students this week before it even gets to the test score itself. So you could look at it, you can take emotion out of it, and you can reflect on it. Because 1 week you can have great scores, the next week you're not so have great scores, and that's just the way it goes. 1 week, my very first week I actually did a lesson on the 3 branches of government, and rather than just lecturing it, we did a foldable. So they take one piece of paper, I probably should have brought an exemplar, and they fold it into 8 pieces, so making a little book, and they write a book on the 3 branches of government. They're given obviously guidelines, and then at the end of the week, based on that book, they could use that book to take the test. But before they took the test, I gave them a lesson loop, and I asked them, how accessible was the work this week? And how much learning, or how much do you think you took away from this lesson this week? And the results I got from Lesson Loop directly reflected the test results themselves. So it goes to show you where the kids fell short in the test. The Lesson Loop results also show that too. So it was hugely impactful. From a teacher standpoint too, real quick, before I pass it over to our rockstar today, we have to do so many things during the week, whether it's accommodations for our students with exceptionalities. For myself, I have a lot of emerging language speakers, and you're constantly creating lesson plans to be more accessible and to accelerate the learning of our students. Lesson Loop kind of takes away a lot of those headaches. They have an app on Clever, which is exceptional. students know how to access Clever really easy. So when you create a survey, which they've already created the vast majority of the questions, which you can go in and tweak if you like, but most of their questions are already top class as it is. You can go in, you can create the survey, it takes you less than 5 minutes, and then the students, right away you say click into Clever, click on the Lesson Loop app, and immediately the students are on that within 2 minutes. There's no hurdles, there's no obstacles in the way. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce our great rock star, Jade Sambo, so she can give her her opinion on it as a student.
I would like to give my overview of Lesson Loop as a student at Navarre. I think I can speak for most of the student body at Navarre when I say Lesson Loop has really been beneficial to us. It allows us to have a voice in the classroom and about the stuff that we are doing and the tools that are being used to teach us. Sometimes as students, we are too scared to tell our teachers that we don't like the way that they're teaching us or the stuff that they're teaching. But using Lesson Loop, it allows us to give our anonymous opinion of the stuff that they're teaching us without feeling like we have to lie about how we feel because we don't want it to come off a certain way. For me personally, my experience using Lesson Loop, I feel like it has really benefited me because sometimes I don't like to say how I feel to the teachers because sometimes it can come off as disrespectful or rude. But since the Lesson Loop is anonymous, I can say how I feel about the lessons that we're learning freely without me feeling like I'm being disrespectful or rude to my teachers.
And then so we came back at the middle of the year and we sat down and we looked at this. And the things that I just want to highlight that Navarre was able to do with Lesson Loop is we were able to create a supportive environment with a leadership team that was meeting with the staff to talk about what they were doing in the classroom, but also then empower the teachers to collaborate with each other, right? And ask the students and get the students involved in what would be the most ambitious instruction and make them very involved in their decision of a school. So if you're thinking about the 5 E's that we just heard about, you'll notice that the way we were able to implement it, it hit those 5 E's. And if we're looking at other research data points, Lesson Loop allows our teachers to have the highest level of efficacy in their practice. Because research shows when teachers see something effective with the students, that's what's going to convince them to do it and to do it consistently and to do it ongoing. And so this allowed us to put the teachers in the driver's seat to feel really empowered to do what they thought was right for the students and then get the feedback from the students that supports that and then cross-correlate it with how our students are doing academically on their class assignments, tests, and grades. And so it's just been a really enjoyable experience, and I think we're now ready to open it up for questions.
Yeah, I got a question. From the student perspective, I would love to hear, is there an example that you know of that a comment was given that in Lesson Loop, a student gave a comment and you saw the change or experienced the change? And I would love to hear, did that happen and then how it made you feel?
Okay, so at the beginning of the school year, before we started using Lesson Loop, the way our teacher, Ms. Beverly, usually taught us when we were first coming into the school year is by giving us lectures and explaining the work to us. But after we started using the Lesson Loop and we were allowed to give our opinions about other ways of us learning, I feel like stuff really improved. The feedback we gave to her, she actually took it into consideration and started using our feedback to help us learn better in the classroom.
How did it make you feel that a teacher listened to you and then changed?
It made me feel good.
Great.
Awesome. Awesome. Good job. Awesome.
I'm not going to grill our eloquent professional young student here. Say a thank you to Nona for joining us from Lesson Loop. And maybe at next time you're at a fancy conference place, you could invite our student to join you and share eloquent thoughts in other places. I love this because I think in general, right, we often think about how do we, right, as a parent of school-age children, and we think about how do we remove technology from our, stop getting on your device,
right? Instead of like, how do you be on your mom's probably said that to you, right? How do we get the students to do good things? And I see all the time my children are playing a clever game, and I'm like, man, they tricked you into learning. You don't even have to right now. And so this is a great opportunity that we're using technology, right? That's allowing our student to get voice back to a process in a way that they understand. For most adults, you're logging into Clever into your thing. We have no idea what you're talking about, right? So where I'm trying to go with the question here is in terms of how do you know what percentage of it, like the students are giving feedback, right? We don't want a couple students to not say anything and a couple students to drive a lot of it. How do we make sure we're getting a good percentage of the students to give input so that way that helps drive that feedback to be best?
I can actually tell you that you can see the number of responses. And each student, when they finish the survey, there's a finish screen, so the teacher can actually go around and check out the answers, but they can see who has completed a survey, so you can ensure full participation.
And so sorry, Nona, how we decided to make sure that we were getting as much feedback as we could, we actually embedded the lesson loop into our quizzes. So it was a quiz question when you reach the end of your quiz or the beginning wherever we put it in, you would go do your lesson loop survey, come back, submit your quiz, and then we could, it doesn't tell us who submitted what when, but we can see 15 out of 20 kids have completed it to this point. And so that's how we've done that in the classroom, is utilize it in that way.
And I'm just gonna say.
Those up here online have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sam. I'm also at a fancy conference, by the way. So thanks for letting me join everyone virtually as well. The question I have is actually for the teachers. As an educator myself, sometimes it's really hard to even be open to critiques from our own students, right? Obviously you guys are, and it seems obviously you're looking at the lesson loop and changing your teaching practices, which I think this whole concept is just phenomenal. I just really love this whole project. I'm wondering though, as a teacher, first, do you feel the pressure? I mean, we're all so time consumed. Do you feel like this is one more added thing for you to do? And how do you get buy-in to others to promote this?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to that. So at the beginning, for your statement there, this is just one more thing for us to do or add to. That was why I kind of just pushed it to the wayside. I was like, oh, that's not necessarily something that I'm interested in right now. But when I seen the accessibility of it and how easy it was to administer these student engagement surveys and to hear back student voice, that was like music to our ears. And at the beginning, before the lesson loop was on the Clever app, that's where we start hyperlinking the surveys that we created to our tests. At the beginning, I had a few kind of glitches where I would hyperlink it and not realizing that I needed to make it for all my classes. So I would have 60 responses for my first hour, but it didn't really matter because it was anonymous regardless. But each hour you will see, and as a teacher you'll say this as well, I knocked it out of the park in my second, third, fourth hour, but my first hour was rough. And those results in lesson loop will show as well. But in regards to the questions themselves, it's extremely easy for a teacher. So once a teacher actually knows how to administer a survey, it should take them no more than 2 minutes to create one, because lesson loop does the majority of the work for you.
And just to piggyback on that, since, like I said, I just threw everything to the wall to see what would stick. Once you get it, and it doesn't take the students very long either. Depending on how many categories you put in, at most, it'll take like 15 minutes. And that's if you do all of the categories for everything. I try to focus on content accessibility and lesson design, and because I'm utilizing it for my instructional practices. And in that regard, it takes less than 5 minutes for me to set up, and it takes less than 5 minutes for the students to complete it. It takes us longer to get our Chromebooks out and logged on than it does to actually do the activity. So in that regard, yes, it is just one more thing, and it's another app to try to figure this out. But for me, it made my life so much easier, and it made me rethink how I was teaching, and the results that I've seen on the back end have just really made it worth the stumbling blocks at the beginning to try to figure out this.
And then the one thing that I just want to add is I think part of this question is just how comfortable is a teacher holding a mirror up to themselves and asking a difficult question? And there's some safety features built in. So one, Lesson Loop does not automatically share results with administration. So if your students come back and tell you something that makes you uncomfortable, you're the only one who knows about it. And two, as Ms. Brambley was saying, you don't have to ask questions in every single domain that Lesson Loop has built surveys for. So Ms. Brambley very intentionally said, I want to see if the students are accessing the content with this instructional strategy. And that meant the survey was more about the instructional strategy, which is obviously how Ms. Brambley's teaching the class. But it's not about Ms. Brambley, it's a reflection of her practice. And it created this distance. And then once the students' results were so clear and it was so empowering for Ms. Brambley, Mr. Smith couldn't stop himself but doing it. Because he looked at it and said, oh my goodness, that's easy to do. And I'm seeing the positive outcomes in my peer and in her students. And I don't want her data to look better than my data. So like, I'm gonna jump on board. And so there's this feedback loop of you're able to see the student's success with it, but you're also in control of what questions you ask with that data. So you only get data back that you've already accepted that you want feedback on as a person. So it's not gonna come back and tell you about your outfit design if you're not ready to hear that that's, you know, your shoes are ugly. So it's nice to have that control, and I think that really helps with getting the teachers to buy in.
I wanted to add back to, before any other question, back to the first slide and the intention of the school effectiveness framework. What Lesson Loop has done is to crosswalk their buckets, their categories. They have crosswalked them with our 7 Cs and our school effectiveness framework and our teacher effectiveness and support system in a way that allows, okay, I'm working on clarify as one of the 7 Cs. That ties to lesson design, that ties to accessibility. And so questions are asked that are really crosswalked to the instructional practices and the work that we've put together for teachers and for practices.
Yeah. Just a question and a comment first. Promoting walkthrough Wednesdays. Ms. Ball and I had a chance to have a great tour by Ms. Roden and visit Mr. Smith's classroom and see firsthand the good work he was doing in the classroom and the command he had there and the engagement of students. So if you haven't had a chance to visit those classrooms, I encourage you to take advantage of that. Second, Ms. Zapata, I think one of the things we like about the zone is the chance to try new things like this. So we've seen some success at Navarre. What's the thought of expanding this and including it in other schools as we go?
Yeah, so we have different conversations going on with different people at different schools where they are engaging in some more professional learning, how to access the system. There's one thing to get a login user access, and another thing is to really go in, try it, read the items, look at the categories, and kind of dive in. So in terms of strategies, one of the things that we did is we engaged our school leadership teams in a session, really a data day. And one of the sections of that data day was working on some Lesson Loop data, digging into the items and how as leaders, they could really support this in their schools. Since then, we've had one of our assistant principals at Wilson has actually engaged in a professional learning session, a PD session with teachers to put some of the surveys together, and we're getting surveys that are coming in from what I understand. I think one of the things that we're we really want to do. I don't want to talk too much about it. It hasn't been fully baked, but there's nothing like hearing from teachers, teacher leaders, as Mr. Smith and Ms. Brambley are, and being able to engage in sessions where they are, again, I'm hesitant because we haven't talked fully about it, but being able to have them speak to other teachers, I think speaks volumes as we engage in getting them hooked in trying the tool and really focusing on the culture of improvement.
I'll just say high level in a nutshell. Just recognizing that I've thrown a lot of folks year one and wanting to be more intentional about how we implement all of the crazy new initiatives and ideas that I have in mind. This year we wanted to make it optional. So we encouraged folks. We've been intentional about trying to identify early adopters and incentivize early adopters, of which Ms. Brownlee was one, and then because she was an early adopter, she then got Mr. Smith on board. Next year, the plan is that this will be required in all schools. So this year, again, because I just threw so much at folks in year one, this year I wanted to make it optional and kind of ease our way into it. We have some early adopters, and they've done some of the work for me, but next year it will be required in all of our schools. It feels like I've been here 10, yes.
Sabata, I think back to a couple, maybe last year, a report that you gave where the student gave feedback about how they felt in the classroom and about their instructors, their safety and all those things. So as I'm thinking about that, I would love to ask the teachers, have you noticed a difference, not where you pointed out the difference academically, but the difference relationally or the difference of culture or environment in your classroom as a result of the lesson?
I'll take that one. This is my first year at Navarre. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. So because they had no idea who I was, and I had not taught at the middle school level before, there was a huge learning curve for me and for them as well. And I think by being able to include their feedback and be very intentional about, you told me this did not work, so now I want to try this. Tell me if this works. If not, let's shift again. And I've tried, and Janae can agree or not, I've tried to be intentional about letting them know I am doing this as a direct reflection of the feedback you're giving me, not just test scores, not just because my administrator told me I needed to do this, but because this is just as much your classroom as it is mine. I know 8th grade social studies. I've been there, done that. I need to know what you know, and the best way for me to get you to the content you need to know and the skills. So much of what we teach is not just westward expansion and the French and Indian War. So much of what we teach are the skills. Do you know how to filter large text of information down into a way that makes sense? Did the foldable help you do that better than a worksheet did? Did you need more group and peer time with that, or does it need to come from me? And so being able to have the students directly give that feedback to me without me just staring at them being like, so can you tell me this now? Has been really powerful and has really shifted the way my classroom functions before Christmas break and after Christmas break.
Thank you.
You want to repeat the question for the?
Yeah, I'm curious. We talked about, I asked about how your academics or your learning was different, but I would love to hear about the classroom environment, how the students interact with the teacher. Did that improve?
Do you like Ms. Bradley more now that
That too.
I honestly don't think that the classroom environment has changed that much. I think it has changed how some people view Ms. Bradley.
Okay, that's great.
in a positive way, or you're not quite sure?
In a positive, because some people didn't like her.
And now.
And I think that speaks to the spot. I think that speaks to the thing that I was wanting to know. That's great. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Great to hear.
It's all connected, isn't it?
So maybe wrap up comment, and I'm gonna pitch it to our student. So we're piloting it, you just heard us talk about that we're looking to make sure teachers do more of it. I know middle school students tend to think they're too cool for everything. I know because I live with one. What would you say to other students to make sure that they're engaging and they're helping with this platform in terms of either how much you've benefited or why it's important for them to do it to other students?
I think the only thing that I could do or tell other students is that they should at least make an effort to like see how it works for them or try to cooperate with what the teacher is saying or doing. But some kids don't listen, you can't tell them anything.
That's honest, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again to Nona for joining us during the conference. We appreciate this program. I especially want to thank all of our staff that are here, of course. We have a Teacher of the Year at the podium. We obviously have a fantastic student. Thank you very much for being here. For the family members of that student who are here, so I would try to start out with parents. Thank you, and we'll move on to our next agenda item. Thank you very much.
Can we also shout out to the first grade little brother that's still hanging in there and taking it back?
Thank you so much. Really, it's been an amazing partnership, and we're so grateful to be working with you guys. And this is our mission: is to amplify student voice and improve engagement, create more joyful, rigorous, nurturing class lessons. And you guys are pioneers, and it's getting done. And you're going to be an example for a lot of other people. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, no worries if folks have ducked out. I know it's late. I know it's late.
Every minute after 8, I make less sense.
Last item is our IRE 3.
Thank you. We are going to move on to the next one and briefly go over our IRE 3 spring preliminary results. As you might recall, we've spoken about it. IRE 3 is actually tested twice in the school year. So we have a March spring testing of third graders. We have, obviously, IRE 3. We have second graders that are also tested since last year. We test our second graders and find out if they're on track to pass in third grade, if they passed as a second grader, the third grade test, or if they didn't pass. And that provides even more time and more runway for us to be able to support the students. We have finished last month our March, and then the retest will happen at the end of May. So I'd like to go over those results. We'd like to take a look at them. Here are the results from year to year for the spring. Here are the final results when we look at last year and the year before. And you can see the difference school to school, right? So same school. For example, Cook-Willard in 21-22, in 22-23, and the difference for that school. You can also see SBCSC high needs schools and their 21-22-23 data. Here you can see 22-23 data, last year's final IRE 3 results, but couched in between our iLearn ELA results for 22-23, all of this third grade data. And on the other side, EOY 22-23 iReady reading or ELA data. You can see the same for the SBCSC high needs schools as well, and the overall information. What we want to show is here is a situation where the spring and summer testing have not only time in between, but also very targeted intervention based on the spring data that allows more students to be able to pass when they are tested at the end of May. And you can see, not for this year yet, but for last year and the year before, the jump, which is in green, the jump in parentheses, from the spring to summer testing for each of the years and each of the schools, as well as an overall. We don't have that information yet for this year because we only have the spring data, and look forward to being able to filling that in and sharing with you once we have the final data. Towards summer testing, what is called summer testing, which is at the end of May this year, is a review of the data. There are 3 domains of the data. It tells us foundations of reading, which has vocabulary and phonics in there, informational and literary comprehension. That information is looked at deeply by 3rd grade teams, by school leaders, so that interventions can be put into place, intensive interventions to support students. And it fits into schedules in different ways. In some places, it's done in our intervention block. Others have actually engaged in an additional block on top of ELA core instruction, on top of the intervention block, to be able to intensify what our students are getting. And we are very grateful that our literacy cadre, IDOE coaches, have literacy support at all of our elementary schools, Capillard, Wilson, and Harrison. And that concludes our brief preliminary IREAD data results.
When's the next round of testing?
It will be at the end of May, I believe 22nd, 23rd, it's about a week at the end of May.
The other one, I know we asked about it before, and I think in general, right, there's the new legislation around retention policy, and we have some retention initiatives that we've already been running, so how will some of this, how does this intersect?
That starts next year, right? And that information, we will want to look at this final May data in comparison to our promotion in doubt, our PID data, to see which of those students and how much overlap there is in the students that we've flagged and identified early on. And so the next year, we'll be looking at potentially another part of the window where the dates will be a little bit extended out. And our hope is that the information, our hope and the data, that the information from 2nd grade and the 3rd grade data is able to be used not only for intense interventions now, but throughout next year, knowing that kids are in different spots and we're supporting them in those areas with progress monitoring.
Seeing no other questions here? Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to the next thing. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, so next up on our agenda is our pre-K conversation around innovating moving forward.
Yes. I will get us started. The pre-K summary is really about where we are right now in pre-K. We are finalizing 23-24, our 3rd year of pre-K in the zone with 4-year-olds using high-quality curriculum, high-scope curriculum to meet children's needs developmentally, foster self-efficacy from the start, integrated and infused into how high scope works is truly building self-efficacy from the start. Providing pre-K in all of our elementary schools has been what we have engaged in or implemented since the 1st year of zone pre-K. And that would mean that we have 5 classrooms in 4 of our schools currently. We've had 247 pre-K students served across the 3 school years, half-day program the first 2 years, and given our Paths to Quality level 3 in all of our schools at the end of last year, awarded that in our 1st year of eligibility, we now have full day pre-K. As we look ahead into next year, 24-25, there will be 4 classrooms across 3 schools, given that Warren currently has a pre-K classroom. We will continue to have 2 classes at Harrison. We would like to continue the high scope curriculum, which, like is mentioned, is developmentally appropriate and has incredible alignment with what we're looking to foster, and that's the self-efficacy from very young. Increased class size and an improved enrollment process for voucher reimbursement as far as how we enroll and what registration looks like versus enrollment and kind of when you have a seat in a class, and not having bus transportation. As partners has been a theme for today, one of the things we've been exploring or taking a look at is Notre Dame's Robinson Community Learning Center, their comprehensive preschool program, looking at their second location, and working within the South Bend community, using high scope curriculum, past equality level 3 as well. And I would like to introduce Susan Dubetsky so that she could talk a little bit about Robinson Center, RCLC, Robinson Community Learning Center, and potentially asking the board to explore a partnership a little bit further.
Thanks. Hello, good evening. My name is Susan Dubetsky, and I'm the director of the Robinson Community Learning Center at Notre Dame. I'm also losing my voice, have been for a while, so I'll do my best. If you can't hear me, I'll try to speak up. I think you can hear me. Okay. There we go. I said my name is Susan Dubetsky, and I'm the director of the Robinson Community Learning Center at Notre Dame. We are an outreach of the university that serves the under-resourced and mostly vulnerable members of the South Bend community. We have programs that operate and serve participants from birth through senior citizens. We have a robust parenting program you may have heard about. We also do great work with seniors, really proud of that work. We have an after-school program, and one of our, I think, really premier programs is our preschool. So as we've looked into the community, one of the things that we hope to do and plan to do is to really look at what's happening in the community, what are the needs out there, and in the course of conversations with Roxana and others, some of the need that has arisen is really in the preschool and early childhood space. Everything from creating more seats to enhancing and elevating the preschools that we have in the area. So we feel like this is an opportunity for Robinson to really reach out into the community and serve in maybe a slightly different way, more of an outreach than folks coming to our classroom. A little bit about our classroom I will share and try to get closer to the microphone. We've had our early childhood program since 2011. We currently have a full day preschool with 15 students at Robinson Center. We are piloting a second location near Eddy Street in Jefferson. Currently it's opened Monday. There's 7 students. We had about 40 students on our wait list for our RCLC program. So we know that, that this is actually going to fill pretty quickly as well. In our recent program quality assessment through Family Connection, we are the first program in the county to receive a 5 or a perfect score on our observation, all of our policies, 360-degree review. We follow the high scope curriculum. We have successfully worked with parents and teachers. We have actually had several of our parents become early childhood teachers. We know that there's a shortage in this area and really nationally, so that's another area we've worked on. We've worked with Ivy Tech to get some of our parents through the CDA program, as well as AmeriCorps volunteers, which is an integral part of our program. We have at least 2 AmeriCorps volunteers in our program at any time. So I think that it really speaks to, I heard a lot of things about the Empowerment Zone tonight. It was really fascinating. And one of the things I know that you're working on is really that family engagement. That's a big part of our program. We have a family event every 2 weeks twice a month for our preschool families. We talk about literacy at home. We talk about fun games you can make for no money. We also bring in wraparound support services like the health department. We provide resources or direct folks to resources in at least 4 different languages right now. Some facts, we've served folks from 41 countries with 20 languages since the opening. I think we have 5 languages currently. It is considered an ENL preschool at the Robinson Center because we have so many second language speakers. And we understand that every family has a unique need, and that's why as we provide the comprehensive support, one of the things that we do is really survey our families, both formally and informally, to see what the needs are, what are the resources we can connect them to, both in the South Bend community, regionally, or federal programs. We've done that successfully with everything from Medicaid to, we helped a parent who had a preschooler and then an older child fill out their FAFSA last week. So we try to do what the families need and try to really connect with them. In terms of working with the zone, do you want me to go through some of that, or should I stop for questions?
We jump into some questions. I know our board expert is Rosa is virtual, so I didn't know, Rosa, if you had initial questions that you wanted to ask or comments, or I can start over here too, because I've got a couple questions.
Sure.
Hi, Susan. I'm sorry that I am a virtual person today. I'm wondering, Sam, if you go ahead and ask your questions, because I would like to really hear about your proposal with the zone. So far I've heard what Robinson Learning Center does, which I am very familiar with. As a matter of fact, I'm coming in to do 3 CDAs in the next couple of weeks. Yeah. So I would, Sam, if you want to go ahead and start with your questions, and maybe some of it would be answered already. Thanks.
So maybe in general, one, to give an overview of what the partnership would look like.
Sure.
I think one that I know would be cognizant for most of us is we think about staffing, right?
Yeah.
What will happen with our current staff and how that might work. But in general, maybe talk about what that partnership would potentially look like next year for us.
Sure. I think we've spoken a little bit, and I've had a chance to visit a couple of the classrooms. And so Roxanna and I had some initial conversation around sustainability and what makes a preschool sustainable in terms of vouchers and financial support. So we focused a little bit on that, and I know that some of those comments have been folded into plans for next year. So we were happy to be supportive in that way. In terms of next year, I think we were talking about really supporting the leadership within the schools in terms of observation and staff observation, supporting material purchases, curriculum, providing student volunteers for the classroom as we were able to, support for the parent and community involvement piece. We sort of have that hammered out at Robinson, so we would like to come in and support those bi-monthly opportunities and engaging the parents and families in that work. And then, there's sort of a curriculum that goes along with that. So I think we've got that pretty much figured out. So we'd like to share that resource. And then I think reaching out to families in general on support for the voucher and licensing program is another area that we can be supportive. Navigating the licensing process and the voucher process for the state of Indiana is complex. And I think that having a resource, and we have some really, Rosa knows our folks pretty well, I think, that we have some folks with some real expertise in that area. And I think that we could really offer that in terms of collaborative partnership as someone that would be on the ground developing processes at the schools that would garner more voucher revenue, for example, and then also just ensuring that that pathway and that licensure stays solid. So I think those are pretty significant areas. Obviously, liaise with the leadership at every school, and I think the empowerment zone leadership as well.
And I think an important point, we've talked about staffing and hiring, selecting, and all of that. I think it's really a matter of, do we explore this further to really iron out some of those details and how that could work? We have talked about that being, including teachers. We know that the AmeriCorps is a group. There are many volunteers from Notre Dame that engage in the pre-K classroom. So in terms of staffing, it's not only the teachers, but also the other supports that could be involved. I think hammering out those details is what we haven't reached the point to and are proposing to explore further. But yeah, we've talked about
I think that's fair.
Operating in our schools.
Right. I think that's fair, and I think that one of the things was not wanting to get too far down the road without having this initial conversation. So certainly those would be things we would be open to discussing and open to kind of solidifying as we further the conversation. It seemed a little preliminary to get too far into that without having this conversation. So that's really where we are.
Thank you.
So Susan, I want to make sure, are you planning on continuing on with the high school curriculum? That's one of the things, and I don't want to do an apples to apples, but this was just mentioned, and staffing wise, you know, South Bend Empowerment Zone has already gone through the high school training. I do know some of your folks who have been in my class as well, but there is a lot of volunteers. I mean, it's very different status and staffing because you do have a lot of AmeriCorps and volunteers. So how do you see this dynamics changing? Like, I'm trying to visualize what the blend would look like. If you could kind of clarify that. What are your thoughts?
So again, I mean, I hate to keep saying this, but I think we're a little bit preliminary, but in our initial conversations, Roxana and I spoke about engaging our volunteers from Robinson Center. So for example, we had 30 undergraduates that volunteered in the preschool this year. We had a wait list of over 30 for the fall. There are a lot of students that love to volunteer in preschools, and we've had success with our program at NDCCI, which is on the near west side of downtown, in terms of bringing those undergraduates to NDCCI and providing volunteers there. So we do feel like our volunteers will travel, and we would, again, hate to get too far out in front of ourselves, but we would hope to engage more of those undergraduate volunteers. As far as AmeriCorps, I think Rosa, that's a federal program, so we would be open to having some of our AmeriCorps serve in other capacities at other locations. That is something we would need to go over with our reps from Indiana.
So my concern is exactly that, and I don't have anything against volunteers, but our children really need continuity of care. And so there's, that mix of, is it 80% volunteers, 20% full-time staff? And again, I'm sure we're way in the, I don't want to get into the weeds, but I just wanted to kind of state that would be one of my concerns.
I guess my only reaction to that would be that certainly we would follow the guidelines for best practice, both for height scope and developmentally appropriate practice in terms of staffing, and that would not include volunteers. That would be added to the basic teacher assistant model that we would agree upon.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like potentially the use of AmeriCorps core members as well as volunteers don't replace permanent staff, but it helps
supplement.
To supplement
Exactly.
And potentially allows you to have less expenses in full-time staff because you have these supplemental. So maybe as opposed to having two teachers, you have a teacher and an AmeriCorps core member, or maybe I'm asking, does the use of core members and volunteers help financially in running the program?
I think that's a difficult question for me because our program was designed with already approved AmeriCorps folks. So it is a situation where we have a full-time teacher and then we have AmeriCorps as essentially the assistant teacher. They are paid and we do pay them. I haven't looked dollar for dollar how that compares to what an assistant teacher would be paid in the empowerment zone. What I have looked at is the revenue generation, and have some pretty good figures for that. I don't think it's a situation where we would have to look to replace any paid staff member with a volunteer or AmeriCorps. First of all, I don't think that's appropriate, and then second of all, financially, I think it would be sustainable to pay staff. Does that make sense? Yeah. Sorry, my kids would tell you after 8 o'clock I don't make much sense. So I'm trying.
Thank you.
Sure.
Although I have no questions, I was just reading, your parent handbook, but that applies to the center, so we just look forward to more details to come. It's too early, yeah.
So, yeah, and so maybe just to help us, Dr. Lewis, clarify a little bit. So, what we're thinking about this evening is sort of empowering you to sort of go and sit down and kind of work through some details and see if this is the right fit.
Right.
And then is the process, does it come back to us for a final blessing, if you will, or are we sort of tonight saying, this is the last chance we're talking about it, you guys figure it out, and if it's good, just go?
No, absolutely not. What I'm hoping for is to get this blessing from the board to move forward so that our teams can potentially work on some sort of a formal MOU that would have the answer to all of these questions, like the financial model, the staffing model, all the details of the partnership, right? And maybe the partnership is just they're supporting us with parent engagement and supporting us with training for teachers, or using their resources to allow us to get access to their volunteers or AmeriCorps, or maybe it's a little bit more intensive and kind of, the complete opposite end of that, where they're kind of administering the program on our behalf. I think either of those options and a lot in between are possible. What I'm asking the board for is an approval to try to hash out some of these details and see what makes sense. Preschool has a lot of compliance, which is why a lot of schools don't necessarily try to get into the preschool world, because it's very heavily regulated and there's a lot of compliance issues. So we have to make sure that it's feasible and mutually beneficial financially, from a compliance perspective, and that ultimately whatever we decide, it's ultimately what's best for kids. So that's what I'm asking the board for today. And then as we kind of hash out those details, come back to the board, maybe not in May, hopefully in May, with an MOU draft for some board feedback, and maybe the board likes whatever that MOU is and adopts it on the spot. Maybe the board says, let's change this line, let's change that line, and we kick it back and then come back for a vote. So whatever the board decides today, there will be an opportunity for the board to take a look at before anything is signed and anything is set in stone. Would you agree?
Yes, that's very well stated, thank you.
Thank you.
So in that same vein then, are you pushing up against some, so if we decide, like this, and we're gonna do this our own, we obviously have to prepare a program to start next year as well, about teachers and all this stuff. So just so we're mindful of timing, this need to be in place by June 15th in order to give us adequate time to prepare for next year, or whatever, just so we're mindful of timing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say honestly, June is probably even too late. Potentially, I'm not 100% sure about also like the procurement process on your side, but I imagine that a big world-class research institution that you're connected to, you might have layers of bureaucracy to get an MOU like this approved and signed.
Am I on camera?
You don't need to say anything. I'll be the one to say it. And so if we are going to make a shift in the most extreme scenario, which is a partnership where they're kind of administering the program on our behalf, then that's going to be a big change, right? So they're going to have to prepare that in that situation, our staff becomes their staff. We have to communicate to the staff, all of that. If it's less than that, then we need a smaller runway. So I think it depends on what's in the MOU, but my hope is that we would come back to the board seeking some sort of a final approval on the MOU in May. But again, I think that could be based on, as we continue these conversations, less ethereally and more like, now that we have the board's blessing, if we get it, we can get into the specifics. As we have these conversations over the next couple of weeks, I'll be able to get a better sense of what might be in that MOU to bring to you. And if, as we have these more intense conversations where we want to get the lawyers involved and all of these other decision makers involved, I'll be able to say, okay, it looks like we're moving in a direction where it is possible that they can administer the program on our behalf, or it's a little bit more tangential and they're just gonna like support us with some volunteers and parent engagement, then we have a lot more time to figure that out. Does that answer the question? Great. Eddie, would you defer on that?
That sounds perfect.
Great.
Sam, I might just add, like, I think more of a point of order thing. So before we make a motion and consider, because it's action we're taking by the board, we probably should solicit public comment. I don't know that there's any public still here, but just for a matter of record, you want to make, if we're done with our discussion, or obviously we can do the comment and then finish our discussion afterwards. But I just thought I would put that out.
I don't know if there's additional discussion from the board before we entertain a motion regarding this.
So, no, I think we need public comment prior.
I thought we took a motion to vote and then we moved into public comment.
I think do it before. I think the more appropriate is to. Oh, you're right, because we would weigh that input and then, so. It's just more of a making sure we follow.
Yeah, since with the pending potential motion on the floor, we'll entertain public comment. So the board will hold public comment period before each vote and at the end of the meeting. It is requested that the public focus comments on the topic of the vote. It is requested that public comment on all other topics be made at the end of the meeting. So we'll do this again at the end of the meeting. Individuals must sign up either online by 12 p.m. on the meeting date or in person no later than 10 minutes after the call to order. Before I read the rest of this, did anybody sign up online? And there's anybody here representing the speech, so I won't read the rest of the rules around public comment, but we made the section available as needed. And now we'll move back to, there's a motion from the board regarding exploring an MOU with.
I move to explore creating an MOU with the Robbins Community Learning Center for preschool.
I'll second.
We have a first and a second on the MOU. Is there additional discussion from the board around the MOU or the motion to create an MOU? Explore an MOU. Seeing none, then I'll consider the question called. All in favor say aye. Any nays? Any abstentions?
Abstention, I understand.
Okay, so sign abstain. Thank you very much for that. A motion passes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for staying through our meeting today.
Thank you so much.
So I think that is the extent of our agenda actually for today. And so just a reminder, board communication, that our next meeting is on, a couple of, updated events. So we mentioned a couple of those earlier, Westside Refresh May 11th. Our next board meeting is the 21st. And we will be out at Warren. So with that, I will call this meeting adjourned at 8:30.